Hi, this is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. And today we have a very special guest on People of IOG, Dr. Dynal Patel. He's a good friend of mine and also the Chief Product Officer of Input Output. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Greetings to everyone from actually, it's not so sunny and warm Cape Town. We're actually getting into the autumn season here. But yeah, I'm doing great though.
Oh,
I'm glad to be on this.
beautiful. Okay, so we always do these things chronologically. So let's start to the very beginning. Where are you from?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And there's multiple kind of dynamics to it. So I'm originally from Zambia. So I was born in Zambia, but I've got a mixed heritage. So my dad is Indian and my mother's Zambian. So yeah, spent the first 18 years of my life in Zambia and then pretty much around the world since then.
Okay, so let's start there in Zambia. So first, how did your father get to Zambia? Is he originally from India, or was his father from India, or how did that work?
Yeah, an interesting story too. So he actually grew up in India. He was a bit of a rebel, so didn't really like the caste system, and was looking for a way to kind of escape that and go find kind of a new land where he would have more freedoms. And he happened to have an uncle actually who was initially in South Africa, made his way up to Zambia, and was running a business there. And yeah, eventually he managed to actually get himself all the way to Zambia to be with his uncle and help his uncle out with a trucking business. So initially, actually started off as his uncle also had some buses, so he started off as a bus conductor. So he would kind of follow the driver on all these journeys throughout Zambia. So he really got to know the country really well. Yeah, over I think probably a period of three or 4 years. Actually, if I go back, so when he landed in Zambia, he ended where my uncle was living.
And
It's a small place.
when was this? The 1970s, 1980s,
1960s.
1960s? Okay, so
Yeah,
he arrived in Zambia in 1960s.
yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
And yeah, and then he lived in this small town called Kanini. It's in Ndola, and actually, I ended up being a lot more extreme than India was. Basically, because you'd got a lot of Indians, and they all just lived in this small neighborhood, and then they practiced the religion 10 times more religiously than anywhere else in the world. And then he thought, oh no, I need to kind of escape this place in Zambia, and he literally went to the furthest place in Zambia where there's like there's no tar road. There's like a path. I mean, it's like um, you know just before the jungle. You've got Congo and Angola on both sides. It's like a really thin strip of land. And both countries were actually had these brutal civil wars, and he felt that this was kind of a better place to live than this place in Kanini. But that's also an interesting story, actually, where he settled to live. And we might have to go back and forth in time a little bit. So,
Oh, that'll be fun.
I did like a pilgrimage to. Actually, my dad passed probably about 10 years ago, and I did a pilgrimage to kind of India to try and. We've never actually traveled to India together, so it was just to try and get a feeling for like where he grew up, where what his life was like, because we hadn't really talked much about that. So I went there with a group of friends, and we rented this car that came with a driver and drove all the way from Mumbai, going up the west coast to his village. And as we got closer and closer to this village, I was like, wow, this looks really familiar. You wouldn't expect to see anthills in India that are in Zambia. This is one of the unique things that you see these massive anthills that might even be 6 or 7 meters high. And I was like, well, this is really unique. And we came. I remember we just came down this valley. I was like, I've seen this before somewhere. And there was a river that kind of meandered through the valley, and we came up, and there was this small sleepy town that you come up. It has one post office. It's got the hospital, it's got the Catholic school and church, and then they've got primary school, and you've got one or two shops, and you basically made your way through this small village. And so literally he must have gone there and figured out, wow, I'm finally home. And it's a carbon copy of actually where he settled in Zambia. And it's actually not far-fetched if you think about kind of plate tectonics, where India was joined to Africa. Yeah, it's not too far off.
So your father found the one place in Zambia that looks exactly like his hometown.
Yeah, exactly where he came from, and he chose to settle there.
Yeah, the downside is that it was straddled by these countries that are geopolitically weren't doing so well. So is that where he met your mother, or did he meet her somewhere else in Zambia? So I'm going to ask you, how did he meet your mother?
Yeah. So first I have to explain kind of his business. So when he was working with my uncle, he set up these. What he did was he kind of got to understand kind of how Zambia was set up and where all these kind of small towns were. And what he realized very quickly was, kind of beyond the big towns, there weren't really any supermarkets anywhere. And he quickly figured out, actually, maybe I can make a business out of, as Indians do, setting up a corner shop somewhere and just supplying it with goods, because his uncle already had this trucking business. And so he basically did that. He just figured out like where in Zambia, kind of more than 1,000 people, and you'd set up like a little distribution hub, and then have little motorbikes that go and fill up basically a one-room shack, which had really basic goods, so nothing more than salt, oil, blankets, matches, and so on. And he would then kind of distribute the goods with a small motorbike, because you didn't really have roads there, so you just use these kind of country trails to get there. And
it sounds like
one of these up like close to Angola and Congo. Literally, it is really on the border of like a massive forest there. And so he was, and then he would spend his time doing stock taking. So he would just travel. I mean, he liked adventure as well. So he would travel around. And this one time he was in this kind of remote village, stock taking, and my mom walked in, and 9 months later, there I was. But he got in a lot of trouble, because my mom was from the royal family there, and so he actually had it was quite an interesting story, because then he was told, he wasn't worthy of an African bride, so he had to go through cleansing ceremonies.
Well, hang on.
Escaped to India.
I gotta ask. Your mother is a princess. She's part of the royal family. What is it? You can't drop that. You have to go. You have to go more details there.
Yeah, well, I mean, in Zambia, it's so diverse. I mean, almost every small country has its own little tribe, and the Lunda tribe. You've got lots of chiefdoms, and in this small area with a couple thousand people, there's a chief, and she was the chief's brother's daughter at the time.
Chief's brother's daughter. So that would make her the niece of the chief.
Yeah.
Okay. So your father met Zambian royalty, and so he wasn't allowed to marry her unless he had to go through some ritual or some proving. Did he have to go through like a rite of passage or something like that?
Yeah, exactly that. So I've got these like wonderful photos of this skinny Indian man with these African feathers, and standing there not knowing what's quite happened to him, and and then he was worthy, and then they got married, and he chose to settle there with my mom. Not exactly where that shop was, but in a slightly bigger town, like 15 kilometers away.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing. So what's your mother's tribe? What's the affiliate?
It's called the Lunda tribe.
Okay. And so what's Zambia like in terms of unified culture? Is it 25 cultures stitched together, kind of like India, and lots of different languages, or is there kind of like a central government and a central culture? How does that work in Zambia growing up?
It's exactly like that. I mean, there's hundreds of languages and dialects, and but growing up, actually, our first president was a socialist or humanist. So a lot of the African leaders that were trained in Russia and came back and had their own kind of flavor of communism. So actually, growing up in this small village, all the neighbors had to be from different tribes, and that was kind of the way the intercultural mixing worked, and it was fascinating because as a small kid you ended up speaking so many languages, and that's the way he got kind of the different cultures to blend and not have the infighting that you see in many other African countries.
Okay, so you grew up in a not only geographically diverse, but a very ethnically and linguistically diverse. So how many languages did you end up speaking as a kid when you were growing up?
Well, I at some point 7, and then I went to a boarding school which was run by very strict Christian brethren, and I couldn't speak any indigenous languages and was forced to speak English only. So yeah, some of them just dropped over the years.
Wow. And this is the 1970s or 1980s, or when was this?
Yeah, so that would have been early 80s. Yeah.
Early 80s. Okay.
Yeah.
So your father met your mother in the late 60s, early 70s, or when did they meet?
Yeah, so it was this 78. So I was born 79. Yeah.
And do you have any brothers or sisters?
I've got one sister. She just got her PhD as well. Yeah, so my mom's very proud. Two in the family.
Oh, that's so incredible. Okay, so you have and she's a younger sister?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So you were born in the 70s, 80s, and you kind of grew up in Zambia in that time period, and you started in an incredibly diverse area. And at some point they said, all right, we're going to send this kid to boarding school. And how old were you when you went to boarding school?
Yeah, that was when I was 7 years old. So there was a government school that I went to initially in this small village called Munyilunga. And yeah, I mean, the education system in Zambia actually wasn't too bad to begin with, but then it deteriorated really quickly. And I was doing really well at that school. And basically the community got together and said, look, we should send this kid somewhere else. And at the time, there was basically a school that had been set up for the missionaries that came in. And literally what they did was they tried to figure out where all the missionaries were across Zambia, Congo, and Angola, and then kind of dropped a pin and then sort of said, okay, this is kind of the central point, and we'll clear the land, make an airstrip, and just build a school there, and then get teachers from the UK to volunteer and teach these missionary kids. So at the time, it was only the missionaries that could send their kids there, and my dad was lobbying for a long time to allow other kids from the region to come there. And eventually there was a breakthrough, and they started allowing kids, other kids that weren't missionaries in Zambia, to attend. And actually even the president sent his kids there, which tells you a lot about the quality of education there.
Okay. Now, your mother's Zambian, your father's Indian, so I imagine English wasn't your first language. So was the curriculum in English? Is that where you learned English, the school, or how did you learn English?
Well, actually, in Zambia, all of your education is basically in English. In primary school, they mix it up a bit depending on where you are. So you'll learn in the local indigenous language, and then around grade 6, 7, then all your exams then are in English.
Okay, so how old were you when you attended the school? And was the school in the same location, or was it in a different area of Zambia?
Yeah, it was in the same location where I grew up. So, but it was only like 20 kilometers away, but it would take you like 7 or 8 hours to get there by road. And just because the road was so atrocious, sometimes you'd have to build the bridge yourself to cross it, and get stuck in potholes, and trees had fallen over the road, and there's fascinating stories of actually the missionary kids, because they would those days they didn't have roads even. They'd trek across Zambia, Congo, and Angola with their porters, and there's wonderful stories about lions coming to attack them, and them going hunting on their way to school. So it was
it was uphill both ways, and we had to make the road ourselves, and every now and then a lion would jump out and attack you.
Oh, it was exactly that. Well, the school's over 100 years old, so it's it's got quite a lot of history as well.
Wow. Okay, and it's run by British missionaries, or it was?
Well, I think now it's mixed up a bit. So you've got Canadian, American, British, so volunteers mainly.
Okay. And how old were you? You were 12, 13 at the time, or?
Well, I went there from 7 till I think 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you have to walk there or drive there, or did you live there? Because it was 20 kilometers from where you were at, but the road was quite bad. So how did
Yeah,
that?
they basically had it was a boarding school.
Okay.
So yeah, we stayed there for kind of 9 months in the year. So and then travel back home for a month and then go back to school for another 3 months.
So were you allowed to leave the school, given you were so young, or did they just kind of keep you like a prisoner there?
No, you were stuck there. So like some of my best friends are actually from that era because we kind of soldiered through it together, and yeah, it was a fascinating time. I mean, special as well. I mean, we were so in tune with nature. They would allow us, 6-year-old, to go out in the bush and pick berries, and I can tell you countless stories when I almost got bitten by snakes and other wild animals. And but yeah, it was fascinating. I mean, we had this massive pool, and basically what we had was basically like, just think of someone just came and excavated, and basically stuck concrete against the walls. Then we had this canal, so there was a river at the bottom, and they had this canal that kind of took water off the small stream. And just before swimming class, someone would run down and get the water coming into the pool. And then the first thing you do is kind of fish out all the snakes in the pool. And every now and again you'd miss one because it had rained and the water was brown, and then literally everyone would levitate out of the pool and then fly out. But it was fun times, though.
it was a great time, except for the water and the lions.
Well, maybe not at the time, but when you think about it, it was like, well, not many people have that as their childhood education and have go through that experience.
So what was the education like? Was it a religious-based education because it was a missionary school, or was it like attending a Jesuit school, or what was it? What was it like?
Yeah, it was very strict Christian brethren. I mean, you woke up and you had to pray, for 15 minutes, and throughout the day, basically, you'd have various sort of Christian activities that you would do. You'd have to. At one point, I'd actually memorized, I think, half of the New Testament. So you do things like that, and they'd have challenges like that, and you'd win prizes. But yeah, having said that, it felt like it was a big family environment, because actually you were stuck there for 9 months of the year. So the teachers were like your parents, really, and you were there from when you were 6 or 7 years old. So it was. You actually saw them more than you saw your family.
So it was a very formative experience. How big was the class size?
Well, we must have had probably 15 to 20 kids maximum in each class.
Mm-hmm. And do you still know them? Do you still hang out with them? Are they still around?
Yeah. Some of my best friends are still from that era. I mean, some of them we went to 2 or 3 schools together, and then at university, we all kind of went different ways, but yeah, we're still in touch.
Okay. So you were here until about 11, 12, and then what happened next?
Yeah. So, so after that, basically we had a choice of, you could do the Zambian, basically the grade 7 exams, which allow you to kind of go back into the Zambian system, mm-hmm. or you could do basically the British curriculum, but then you'd have to go to another British school. And at the time, the options were that you could go to this other missionary school, but it was on the other side of Zambia. It was also a boarding school, or you'd have to go to the UK. And I mean, both of them were prohibitively expensive. And yeah, luckily again, because I was got the best grades from basically when I entered school and left school. The community came together and basically set up a fund for me to go to this school, so that I could carry on with my education.
Okay, so now you were only 20 kilometers when you were 7 to 11 at the boarding school. So I imagine your parents would come see you all the time, and now suddenly you're now moving somewhere else. So how did that work?
Well, actually, my parents weren't allowed to come see me, and there was quite strict protocol around that.
Really?
Despite them being so close. So yeah, basically I'd see them. We had like what they called a half term, so you'd like a mini break, which is just a couple of days. So I could go home sometimes during half term, but yeah, most occasions I wouldn't see them for a couple of months, and then see them
Wow.
for a day or two, and then yeah.
That
And
must have
my like sometimes I actually didn't even see my dad at all, because he was on doing his business, and he was always traveling around, and there was always drama somewhere. So sometimes I'd come home and he was stuck on the other side of Zambia doing his business, and I'd have to go back to school. And then he wasn't allowed to come see me. So and those were the days without phones, so you couldn't really communicate easily.
wow. That's really tough to go from growing up with your parents to not seeing them for 2 or 3 months at a time. But I guess because you did that for 4 years, you were better prepared to go somewhere else for an extended period of time. So let's talk about that next school. Where exactly was it located?
Yeah, so the next school was in a small town in Zambia called Mukushi, and it's basically the farming district in Zambia. And yeah, so this was set up as I guess for that farming community. They had a lot of kids that needed a school, and there wasn't any kind of good school in and around that area. And there was also a very strong Christian community in that area, and they decided to found this Christian school. So the first one I went became almost a feeder
The next one.
school to this new school.
Okay. And was the curriculum heavily focused on math and science, or was it a theological curriculum? What was the curriculum like?
Yeah, that was a purely British system. So they did the O levels, A levels, which you would do in the UK as well. So it was the same curriculum.
Okay.
But also, yeah, very, very strict in terms of kind of the Christian practices.
So were you like your father and a bit of a rebel and tried to find ways to get around the system, or did you try to comply with it? Where were you on this the spectrum of good student to rebel? We know you got good grades, so you're a brilliant guy, but
yeah. Well, I'd say somewhere in the middle, because I could get away with a lot. My mom just cared about the grades, so as long as I did well at school, then she was willing to overlook, other things. So yeah, so I could get away with with a lot. But yeah, I would say only really at university, that was really the first time really I was exposed to kind of the outside world, because I'd say till I was 16, 17, you kind of lived in this bubble, which was your school, because it was the boarding school, and you'd be there for 9 months of the year.
now did you sneak out or anything like that?
Well, there's not many places to go to, because you had a couple of fields, and you could go climb the hill, and you could, well, what we could do, because this other good friend of mine, where we had grown up together and gone through this first school together, his dad actually had a farm very close to this other school. So on weekends, I was allowed to actually go and stay with him, and then yeah, that was kind of the fun time that we would have, and misbehave as as normal high school kids would.
Okay. And so on the farm side, did they have horses and pigs and standard farm animals and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big commercial farm, so they grew a lot of crops, and had yeah, a huge herd of cattle as well.
Did you play with the cattle?
Not really that much. I mean, we were more into. I mean, he had a farm bike, so we had a lot of fun with that.
Okay.
Creating our own track and riding around, and we used to also make some of our own local brew as well that we would drink at a young age. Thankfully, we're not blind, but
you figured out how to do moonshine at a reasonable age. All right. Okay. So now you're getting 16, 17. You're starting to think about what's next. And there's the family business. There's the chance to do university. There's a chance to go abroad, and because you're part of the English system, maybe go to London. So what were the influences there as you were looking to the next step of your life? What was really appealing to a 16-year-old Dynal Patel?
Well, actually, at that time, my dad was like, "You can be one of two things. So you can either be a doctor or a computer scientist. Those are your options." So yeah, I didn't actually want to do either. I wanted actually to be an aerospace engineer, and so I'd applied actually to study aerospace engineering in the UK, and actually got into Bath University to do that, but it was just way too expensive to do that. Then I'd looked actually in, so I'm a big Formula One fan, so this was actually my way to try and get to Formula One. But and then I'd looked at South African universities that did that course, but then it was in Port Elizabeth, which is a bit of a sleepy town. So yeah. So my options started to dwindle a little bit, and then actually, because I was on the British system, so I finished school in June, and then the university actually only starts in February. So I'd gone with another friend to South Africa just to kind of check it out. So my first time traveling there, and so we did road trips, and we're trying to just finding ourselves. So finally we were free. So going to clubs and doing the things that teenagers do. And yeah, kind of forgot to apply for university on time because we were preoccupied doing other things. And yeah, and luckily the Cape Town University application program was still on. So, and I had the choice of electrical engineering or computer science. So I just kind of applied for both and got both. And initially started off actually with thinking that I was going to go and be more of an electrical engineer, but when I started the course, it just didn't appeal to me as much. It was more the software side. It was like, actually, you can emulate all of that stuff in software. So if you just give me a generic board, I can do everything that you can do there. And then ended up focusing on computer science.
At Cape Town University. So this is your first time going to South Africa. Where did you go to the bush? Where did you go? I mean, what was South Africa like as a 16?
Well, for me, it was this new universe. I mean, coming from the village and the rainforest. I mean, Zambia has some towns and so on, but like, right. But yeah, this was another scale. I mean, Johannesburg is huge. It got a lot to offer. We did a road trip down to Durban, and that's also a lovely city, very warm. And spent some time down there. So I actually didn't even go to Cape Town before I started university. I just kind of applied, and everyone's like, yeah, Cape Town's the best place. And it was really the right choice. So it was actually the best university. And actually the story gets better because I walk into my first computer science lecture. And so I have to take you back now to the high school in Zambia, Chingelo. So one of my maths teachers there, so he came out for, I think, 2 semesters, and he was basically quoting this other girl that happened to be in the area, and so he decided to come to Zambia and donate some of his time. So he was running the computer science lab and teaching maths, and he was actually the best teacher there was. Everyone really loved him, and we were all sad to see him leave kind of after 2 terms. And so I didn't really hear from him after that. And then I walk into this computer science lecture, and there he is in front. So yeah, it was I don't know. It's one of these things. I guess it's God or whatever you want to call it that kind of just made this happen. I've got no other way of explaining it really. And so I had this person actually who could guide me through university, and he won like best teacher awards. He was by far the best lecturer at the university, and I had a personal connection with him because he had basically married the niece of my next door neighbor back in Manyulunga, right? So going back to actually where my mom and dad lived in Zambia. So it was fascinating to have such a mentor there for me, through these years. And, and I think it was mainly because of him that I, also developed this strong interest for computer science, and decided to sign up even for more computer science classes than maths and other topics.
Okay, that's just incredible. You keep having this serendipity in your life, your dad and you. Okay, so you're in university at Cape Town. You're an undergraduate in computer science. You're starting to take these classes. You're very engaged, very interested. There's obviously the applied way you can go, graduate, you go into industry, get a job, and then there's the academic route. You go get a master's or a PhD. Where were you at as you were traveling then? Did you always know that you wanted to go get a PhD, or did you have this idea that maybe you take some time off and get a job and work in industry and see where it goes?
I was always keen to go work in industry, to be honest, and I'd say it was more this professor that kind of guided me in this direction. I think it was at the end of my honors degree, which in Zambia, which in South Africa is basically after your fourth year of university.
Mhm.
And at the time, he had a sabbatical in New Zealand, and was like, well, I could do with having a great computer science student come with me and help me with some research programs. So yeah, basically he offered me an opportunity to travel with him for half a year and go to New Zealand and do some research there with him. And yeah, it was, I think, during that time in New Zealand that I really fell in love with research and got to understand how that whole world works. And we had some fascinating projects with Vodafone that they were sponsoring. Yeah, this lab also in New Zealand was actually they were developing this digital library software. So it was actually open source software, the Greenstone Digital Library Suite. And so I learned a lot about that. And my project was about making it mobile friendly. So initially it was just web-based, and I was working with style sheets and just making it a bit more kind of friendly, so it would look nice on what did we have in those days? Those pocket PCs,
Yeah.
HP pocket PCs, so making it look good on there.
And where in New Zealand was this? North Island or South Island?
It was the North Island, so in Hamilton.
Hamilton. Okay. So that's a bit of a culture shift to go from South Africa and Cape Town all the way over to New Zealand. I mean, first
it was, and I ended up in this, well, I ended up in this residence, and it was basically for all the Asian students. And I was kind of the one token African guy there, and it was super fascinating. Everyone would cook for themselves because it was a self-catering kind of residence, and then out there I was cooking my African food, and everyone's fascinated. What's this? What are you cooking? And but yeah, made some really good friends there, and the time went so quickly. I mean, New Zealand's so beautiful. I mean, you could spend your time kind of traveling, and I think per square inch, it's definitely the most beautiful place I've been to. Maybe actually Norway competes too.
Yeah, Norwegian
But
pride.
definitely you see a lot of cool stuff. I mean, you drive for 15 minutes and you've got steam vents and mud boiling and a volcano and black sand beaches and pristine blue lakes. It's just fascinating.
And did the other students keep you around to keep the snakes away? Because you've developed that point
well,
about 15 years of
I
snake.
don't think there's anything there that can kill you, so I felt pretty safe.
Right. Which is so strange because your next door neighbor, Australia, everything tries.
Yeah, it's got everything else.
Okay, so you were there for about 6 months in New Zealand, and the professor that you went along with, he went back to South Africa, to Cape Town, or
yeah, so he went back, and so I'd kind of learned about this digital library software, and one of my passion projects is actually about preserving African culture, and it's I'll tell you a bit more about that. But so I'd actually just applied for a grant to UNESCO, saying I'm this at that time a master's student, and said, look, I'm passionate about preserving African culture, and there's a lot of it in these museums, and it's rotting, and no future generations won't have access to this. So can we kind of work together with them to digitize these artifacts and tell the stories and make that available online, so American universities can pay for it. And so I started using this digital library. So I applied for that grant and I actually got the grant. And then I was basically doing these capacity building training programs with universities and museums and national archives across Africa. So that was quite a fascinating time too. So got completely distracted from all my academic research, and started actually promoting this digital library software in Africa.
What was the digital library software called?
Greenstone. I think it's still around. Yeah.
Okay, and did you actually physically have to travel to the museums to archive it, or did you do it remotely?
Yes, well, I was doing more. So the deal was that I'd do training programs. I'd teach capacity builders. I'd teach university students and lecturers how to use it and work together. And they would work together with kind of local museums and help them customize the software for that museum or for the university.
Oh, but did you? That's kind of depressing. You didn't get to actually go to the museum itself and travel all throughout Africa?
Well, sometimes I would,
Oh,
but most of the time it was kind of stuck in a room doing the training program, and then. But it was fascinating all the same because we'd have, all these, you'd get to do all the tourist stuff and then meet everyone after work, after the training programs and socialize.
So let's talk about that. That's kind of a nomadic era. So where did you go in Africa?
Yeah, so it was Namibia, Zimbabwe, and actually the most fascinating time was in Senegal, in Dakar. I think I told you that story before when I was in a plane crash.
Let's go there.
Yeah.
Let's go there with the plane crash in Senegal.
Yeah. So basically, I was doing this training program there. So I'd flown out and we're there for a week. And actually, the guy that given me the grant or was leading this program in UNESCO decided to come out as well and just see the work. And he was retiring, so he just wanted this to kind of be one of the last things that he did to come and help out. So we had a great week with all the capacity building. I mean, if you want to see a lot of African culture and history and all, definitely go to Dakar. It's rich in culture. So I was there for the week and then was heading back to university in South Africa. And it was the 6 a.m. flight. So it flies, I don't know if it's still there, but flies from New York, stops off in Dakar, refuels, picks up a few more people, and then flies over to Johannesburg. So everything was normal, go through check-in, passport control, half the people on the plane were still sleeping. So you managed to find a seat, sit down. And then, you taxi and I was sitting on the wing actually, and we were just taking off. And I remember this so vividly. I just remember hearing a bang. And then the next thing, everything went in slow motion and my life flashed past me. All that stuff that people say is true. And, and there was literally this huge fireball that I saw just really just light up all the windows. And the whole plane just started, kind of doing that type of motion. Everyone was screaming, the air hostess was screaming, brace, brace, brace. And we must have been like, I don't know, 20 feet up. And probably like about 10, 15 seconds later, we crash landed at the end of the runway. The plane was spinning, came to a halt. The slides came down and we slid down and then, came running out. And and then we looked through, I looked back at the plane and basically 3 of the engines had completely collapsed. And everyone was wondering, the pilot had lost his voice completely. And basically what happened was, that time of year, a lot of birds migrate from Europe to Africa. And they didn't have any predators to chase any of the birds in Senegal, or it was too cold that morning. I'm not sure what happened, but basically, the plane flew through a flock of birds and 3 engines disintegrated. It's just unreal that birds can have that impact on a plane. And thankfully, no one was killed. I think there was one lady who took off her seatbelt and she was flung up around a bit. But besides that, everyone was fine. And and then we had to stay in a hotel without any electricity or water. And I remember just going to the bar, getting a bottle of whiskey, and drank that whole thing, and just didn't have zero effect. It was like, it might have also been bootleg whiskey. I don't know.
You're like, so how you doing? I had a day. Wow. How big? What was it? Like a Boeing 737 or what type of plane?
Yeah, 747.
747. So that's a big plane.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's terrifying. So how long was it before you flew again?
Well, that's where the story gets better, right? Because then, so I flew back to South Africa and I was there for like 2 months, and I had to go and present a paper in Glasgow, and so yeah, just yeah. Thankfully, those days they pay for your flights and everything, so took the flight, and then we're coming into Glasgow, and I was terrified of flying. Literally, I was counting the minutes and holding my seat as we're coming down. Like, okay, 5 more minutes to go, 3 more minutes to go, and I look outside, and there's still clouds. 2 more minutes to go, 1 more minute to go. Look outside, and there's still clouds everywhere. 30 seconds to go. I'm like, okay, we should have kind of broken through. There's something wrong here. 20 seconds to go. There's still clouds, and we literally broke through. And then the next thing I saw was water, and I just shrieked like a girl because I thought we're landing on a lake. I was like, what's the chance of this? And everyone around me was like, what's wrong with this guy? Put an African on a plane and look what's happening here. And literally the airport was waterlogged. So, but I just thought we were landing on a lake because you couldn't see anything. Literally broke through the clouds. You didn't have time to kind of mentally prepare. I just saw water everywhere. I just screamed. But yeah, thankfully we touched down and everything was fine. But yeah, I fly easier now, but yeah, it's taken a while.
Yeah, I was going to say I feel terrible about having you fly out to Colorado now. Okay, so you had this interesting experience in Senegal, and
Yeah.
despite that, you're still traveling all around. You're archiving all these artifacts. And what was your master's thesis on? What were you doing research in? Was it in this area, or were you interested in a different topic?
Yeah, so it was basically looking at different ways of navigating content on resource constrained devices. So those were the days when you had those pocket PCs. It was really hard to kind of browse any content because it was structured for more desktop type screens, and we were wondering, okay, if you start to look at content on these, what type of interaction techniques naturally lend themselves for these type of devices? And then we started looking at kind of new interaction techniques. So if you're browsing maps or photos or different types of documents, what type of interaction techniques naturally lend themselves? So it was quite fun. We got to invent like, zoomable interfaces, squeezable interfaces, using tilt to navigate, and then testing that against different document types to see.
And this was in the mid-90s, or when was this? Just trying to understand how this.
So that would have been 2004.
Oh, okay. So this was a little bit later. So you already had a BlackBerry and a Palm Pilot and these types of devices as a reference point.
Yes.
Okay.
But yeah, still it took like to kind of make these things work. You had to kind of build a graphics library from the ground up and do a lot of stuff in assembly to kind of make it work smoothly. So a lot of the computer science work was around that, just optimizing different algorithms so that it, you have kind of a fluid interaction. So to the end user, it just feels natural. And I mean, today you have this on your iPhone now. You've got you can easily zoom, and this was the precursor for a lot of that research. And yeah, and actually, if we fast forward like 6 or 7 years later, I had a bunch of Samsung lawyers actually call me. Actually, they sent an email saying like, would like to understand more about your PhD research, and we've got this case in the US, and would you mind if we fly over and ask you a few questions? And it's like, okay, well, why not? And there's no, we're willing to pay you as well. And it's like, oh wow, that day rate is amazing. So of course, come over. I'm happy to do this. And we spent a lot of time kind of going back and forth and explained the PhD research. And I found out afterwards that there were basically, was one of the cases with Apple, basically between Samsung and Apple.
They were trying to show that you had prior art before Apple.
Yes, that was exactly it. And it just happened that some guy in Africa had done it before Apple had done it. And then they were able to kind of I don't know, dismiss part of the case, but I'll claim more than that for the African continent.
That's great. You beat Steve Jobs to the punch. So, all right. So, where'd you do your PhD? Was it also Cape Town that you wrote your dissertation?
Yeah, it was in Cape Town, but it was an arrangement with 3 universities. So I got basically 3 supervisors. One was in New Zealand at the university that I was, and then the other was in Wales, in Swansea. And all of them were actually specialists in this area, and I decided to work with all 3 of them. I mean, the actual PhD itself is from the University of Cape Town, but it actually collaborated with University of Waikato in New Zealand and Swansea in Wales, and a lot of the peer-reviewed research papers are from the three universities.
Okay, so after you finish, you actually fortuitously finished at a really good time, right? When the iPhone's coming out, all these interfaces are coming out. So you were probably a hot commodity on the market. So what happened next? Did you want to go?
So quite interesting, because like I'd done this research, and basically Nokia was interested in it, and they wanted to have a discussion around, could we license this? And the Google, actually Picasa team, because we'd shown that to Scott Jensen, who was working for Google at the time. So he was their kind of head of UX at the time. So he was really interested in having me over there as well to see if I could build this into the Picasa photo software. And so then we decided to see if we could set up a company, basically to kind of develop this and then license this to these kind of interested parties. But then the universities couldn't agree on the IP, which was the funny part, and took each other to court, and we lost the window of opportunity. And it's a sad story, but I think we could have done a lot with it, and it's unfortunately something I had to let go. And it was just really after that I was kind of disillusioned with all of that, and I thought, well, I just kind of need a break from academia, and I actually got a call from a hedge fund in the US, and they owned basically a content business and a mobile phone distributor, and it was the time when kind of wallpapers and ringtones were getting a bit old, and they were wondering about kind of what's the next innovation, and what new services can we build, and so on. And they decided to bring me on board to kind of help them with that, to think about what new services might be able to kind of launch. And it was quite an interesting setup. They had kind of the tier 2 carriers in the US, in the Caribbean, some of the tier 1s in Canada. So I got to kind of scout, work with lots of different startups to scout kind of new services that we could bundle on these phones for all these carriers. So we were doing, Groupon before Groupon was cool, and instant messaging before Skype or WhatsApp was cool. But I think it was just too early, so we weren't really. Most of that came kind of 3 or 4 years later, when the computing platform and data costs were kind of at the right price point. So, and at the time we were dealing with Java, I don't know, J2ME, I don't know if you remember that. And it was just a nightmare to get software working across all phones in a consistent way. And we tried it, but I think that the best work I did there was actually on more the other side of the company, which was the distributor. So they would buy these end-of-life phones, and they'll need to then. So most of them, you didn't get any support from Samsung and some of the manufacturers anymore, and they had to rework them. So I'd kind of reverse engineer the firmware so that you could put in wallpapers and new ringtones for the carriers. And so that was quite fun, kind of downloading that firmware and trying to figure out, doing a lot of
were you doing solo or
some content.
Were you doing this solo, or did they give you a team?
Initially I started doing that by myself, and then I found another fellow hacker in the UK who was actually doing it from more hardware based approach, and we decided to work together, and we basically developed this little clip where you could plug like 6 or 7 phones, and you press a button and reflash them in like 7 seconds, and then it would go down the assembly line. But that, normally it would take them like 10 to 20 minutes to flash a phone. So just the productivity gains that they got in that just made them millions. That's when I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I do next? And at that point in time, I'd actually gotten married to my high school, actually university sweetheart.
From when you were at Cape Town?
In Cape Town, in the US. And we got stuck in the green card application issues. And I had my green card and she couldn't come on mine. And in the end, it was just easier to leave the US.
So hang on. So your wife was an international student from the United States in Cape Town, or let's go there.
No, she was German. She was German. Yeah.
German.
So, yeah.
Okay, so she was a German student at Cape Town. So she was born and did her undergraduate at Cape Town.
Yeah, so we met there and then got married in the US, and then just the whole visa thing didn't really work out, and then we decided just to leave the US. It was just easier to go and just do a new start completely in Germany. And then it was quite interesting. Actually, that relationship didn't last, unfortunately, because when we got back to Germany, she realized that she didn't actually want to be in Germany and she wanted to be back in Africa. And I was like, I just got to Germany and I just got to learn the language, and I just managed to get find the only telecom that allows you to speak English, which was Vodafone at the time. And it was fascinating projects there as well. And she was in the development aid field, so she wanted to go in deep dark Congo and run these pilots and programs. So our lives were just in different phases at that time.
That's just so incredible that the African guy, like, no, I want to stay in Germany, and you literally grew up right next to the country that she wanted to do aid in, and she went back.
Yeah, so she ended up actually in Mozambique and has been doing like great work there for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others, doing all these phenomenal studies. And then I ended up kind of in the first world, so we actually crossed paths. So
Well, it was good for the time. So you're in Germany now. Whereabouts in Germany? Was it Munich or Hamburg or Frankfurt, or what city were you in?
Yeah, we went around quite a bit. So we started off in Berlin, one of my favorite cities. I absolutely love Berlin. So Berlin and Cape Town are my two spots in the world. So we started there and then went to Hamburg and then in Düsseldorf. Spent probably the most time in Düsseldorf, where Vodafone were.
Okay. And so what was Vodafone like? So you were working at this hedge fund, you were working at in the academic world, you've done artifact archiving. So you've had a very diverse life. Then suddenly you're at this big company, Vodafone. Was this the first large company that you'd worked for?
It means the stint there. I actually did some work as well for Microsoft Research. It was like an internship, but an extended internship.
But that doesn't count. You coach people from Massaro.
So then with Vodafone, it was quite fascinating. I mean, it was the group company, and they owned, I think at the time, it was about 40 operators around the world. So many across Europe, some Vodacom in Africa, who also have their own satellite companies. They also had a big stake in Verizon in the US. It was quite fascinating. So we got to basically develop products for the group within the group company, but for all these satellite companies. So the first project I did there was technology road mapping. So I was looking at kind of marketing and technology trends. What's coming up in the industry for the next 5 years, and really putting kind of positioning statements for the CEOs in all these satellite companies, so they would have a handbook. So if someone comes to them and says, what's our strategy on battery, or what's our strategy on antennas, or whatever cellular technology, they would have kind of the company line around that. So, and it was quite a nice document that they would kind of give out to show thought leadership. So I initially started on that, and then moved into their what they call the terminal business, which was the business that would develop basically handsets, CPE devices, among other things. So it was quite a fun unit. I mean, we had basically everything in-house to design our own handsets, would work with a lot of Chinese manufacturers to actually make them, and then customize them for these 40 markets. So hugely complex, trying to get a portfolio of 20 phones agreed with all these different markets, because they've all got different needs and different price points that they need to hit. And so just getting to rationalize that portfolio and the negotiations that went into it. But yeah, it was super fascinating. So some we would make our own, so there'll be Vodafone branded or Vodafone made. Others, were from other manufacturers, and we would also build services on them. So there's a suite of Vodafone services that would put on these devices. So we Vodafone 360, that was it was Vodafone trying to get into social networking. I think they got in a bit early as well, but we're looking at doing something quite innovative there. And I think my most fascinating years were actually the last 5 years of Vodafone, when I moved from that terminal business to the IoT business. And so then I was working in their commercial strategy team, and we got to think about what are kind of future propositions for the telecom industry. Minutes and data is kind of getting old, and what does the future of telecom look like? That was really fascinating for me, because we really got to think about, okay, where's the car industry going in terms of connected cars? The drone use case was a great one, because we're looking for what use cases could we have to drive rollout of 5G. You needed a use case that was data hungry, low latency, and drones was just the perfect use case. But so we're trying to kind of lobby the European Union and work with others to see if we could get a SIM card mandated, in the drone, so we could bring telecom propositions to the industry and work with the GSMA around that. And so that was fascinating time, and it was actually quite collaborative as well. So we got basically all the telecom operators, because everyone was trying to jointly work together to create this future market. So to work with them to kind of craft this. And one of the other areas we're looking at was also the eSIM, so this reprogrammable SIM. We did one of the first products there with Amazon on it was actually the first implementation of eSIM, and being able to kind of program your SIM over the air, and be able to select your telecom operator over the air and switch. So we did that with the Kindle Fire product. So that was quite innovative, and being able to buy like a bundle with one click. It sounds silly now, but it was super complex systems to actually make that work. And then looking at just so the core of what we were developing was this managed connectivity platform, and that platform basically aggregated data from different bearers. So you had your 3GPP technologies, your 2G, 3G, 4G. You had Wi-Fi, you had satellite, and you needed to kind of harmonize access to all this connectivity, and make sure that you could bill and provide value-added services. So that was kind of the core product, and then we got to build on that different vertical propositions. So would partner and develop specific products for healthcare industry or the transport industry, and some we got to build internally. Actually, Silvio, and when you get to speak to him, he'll be able to talk about one of the products that we worked on together, which was this internet in the car proposition.
That was with BMW, right?
Yeah, so with Daimler and BMW, so enabling consumers to kind of have Wi-Fi in the car, but then also on the B2B side, use that connectivity for telematics, and have that so that the manufacturers had real-time data, and they could create new innovative business models as well. So we evolved that product and had a lot of interest. Actually, we rebranded that for other partner organizations as well. Yeah, so that was fascinating. And actually, one of the projects that I was looking at was big data as well, and looking at what's kind of the telecom role in this space. I mean, IoT has massive amounts of data, and how could telecoms leverage that, and how do they kind of position themselves almost as like the Visa of IoT, so every transaction that goes through the network, they get a cut. And that was looking at, how do you know who owns the data, what rights are associated with that data, how can you kind of monetize that data? And I was looking around. I mean, we assessed kind of the platforms we had. Definitely, we didn't have the infrastructure to be able to kind of do that use case. We looked around the industry, and there really wasn't anything there. And
was it Hadoop out yet, or was this right around that time when that was coming?
Yeah, I think that hadn't come out yet at that time. Yeah, and that's what my curiosity for blockchain, basically. I think I'd found some papers around that, and that's what got me interested. And then I think around that time was 2017 with the whole hype around blockchains, and I happened to find a company that was promoting themselves as kind of the internet of blockchains, which was WangChain, actually. Ironically, they're very much like IOG, in that they're also very research based. So they get like the best cryptographers and PhD students from Peking University, and they come and build out the tech, so they're very research driven. I mean, they were able to kind of turn stuff around really quickly, and the students would also be part of kind of implementing the code. So initially, I just came on as I'm just fascinated by blockchain. I just want to come on and be useful and just bring my expertise in product and see if I can help.
So what part of blockchain was most fascinating to you? I mean, everybody comes from a different perspective. Was it the use and utility, or was it a philosophical thing? Like, what did you really like about blockchain technology when you first discovered it?
Well, for me, it was always about kind of this democratizing kind of access to things, because I'd kind of grown up in an area where, even coming from Zambia, you never had access to many of the services that everyone else in developing markets had access to, and even things like bank accounts and getting a phone, basic services were really hard, just even in Zambia, to access. Yet alone, I guess when the internet came, all these other things. Firstly, data was way too expensive, so you couldn't afford to spend enough time there. And I think for me, it was more this. So suddenly you had this platform where anybody could begin to access this, and it was in a more kind of democratic way. So I think that's what fascinated me. And then I'd read some research about the potential for it with financial inclusion, and I think a lot of that messaging really resonated well with me. And when I went to WangChain again, it was initially just to kind of help out, and I just got sucked into it. It was just like I've always been hungry for knowledge, so I've always had that personality. So you throw me in an area, I'll just dig, suck it all up, and so it wasn't long before I kind of got on top of it and started to help them also on the product side. And they were looking at trade finance, and that was a use case that fascinated me as well. And
what was it like working for a Chinese company? So you go from the bureaucracy of MSR, you work for some of the small guys, the hedge funds. Now you're in Germany, you're speaking German, and then suddenly you're now working for the Chinese company. So were you the only German African guy there, or what was the team like?
We actually started off with an American CEO that was running the company at the time.
Right.
So we had a very Western mindset to begin with, and very entrepreneurial. The founder, Jack Liu, who's actually also behind Factum, so he's been in the space for a while. We also had a successful project, and he was looking to solve the blockchain interoperability problem. And so he'd got the Peking University guys to come up with this white paper, and they'd done a decent job kind of defining it. But what we found was that it was, we developed strategies, but it was really hard to execute any initiative that came from kind of the West, because the engineering was all in China. So we'd kind of develop it and get it to a point, and then we were never able to really kind of get it implemented. And the things that seemed to get more traction were things that kind of were more embryonic from the China side that were then kind of making it into the rest of the world. So I think that was the way that we found was most productive to kind of work.
So what was that culture like? Was it that there were silos and there was the Western guys and the Chinese would speak Chinese and the Western guys would speak English, or how did that actually work in practice? Was everybody mixed?
Yeah, it was just a big information gap. So like, you would dream up all these things that we could do, all these use cases we could work on, have the partners, and then you might just get like one word answers back, yes, no, okay, but could we explain this? And most of the team didn't speak English, for example, most of the engineers. So it took some time to actually get people in place that could help translate. And actually, when it started working well was when the team started to blend a little bit more, and I was able to travel there even and meet the team and build some of those relationships.
Was that the first time you've been to China?
No, it was actually the second time. The second time I'd been to China. I'd actually traveled there just with a group of friends before. But yeah, it was also interesting to kind of see the work ethic. I mean, my counterparts there would work easily 12, 14-hour days, and that was just accepted. And I guess they were also part of this new thing, so they were just driven by it as well.
Okay, so you were at Wanchain for how long?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think about a year and a half, because I wasn't kind of formally on, because initially I was just helping out, and then later I started actually just to work with the product teams there and help them to kind of evolve the proposition. And then they had basically an enterprise proposition and also their public blockchain, and they were getting a lot of traction actually on the enterprise side. And the public blockchain, yeah, that leveraged a lot of things from Ethereum and added their bridging technology to lock up assets in other blockchains and bring them onto one chain. And the idea was to have these private smart contracts as well on their platform. But we were still kind of building out that tech at the time.
And then comes IOHK. We poached you.
Yes.
So how did that happen?
I'm trying to remember the exact sequence of events. So I'd met, I think it was Chris Cleverly in Cape Town. It was actually through a mutual friend, Andre Cronier, who's actually a big shot in the DeFi industry, and he's based in Cape Town. And we were having breakfast, and Chris just happened to walk past. Actually, it's like, and then we just sat down and introduced each other, and then I think it was a couple of weeks later, we bumped into each other again, and I was telling him, yeah, I'm looking for kind of new challenges and new opportunities. And he happened to know Diane at the time. So she was leading, I think, the commercial area in IOG at the time. And then he was trying to kind of work a deal with her, and basically said, I have the guy who's going to help you, and this is the guy you guys need to hire. And so he actually made the intro to Diane, and then she recommended me internally. And then, yeah, I mean, the process kicked off there. I think I had like 10 interviews. I think I must have broken the record.
We just kept passing you around. We're like,
yeah,
this person. I think I also interviewed you as well.
Yeah, I got you at the airport. I think you were just in between flights, and yeah, we managed to have a chat.
Yeah, gosh, that was it feels like it was so long ago, but it really wasn't. All things considered, just so much passes. Okay, so you come on board IOHK, and I believe we hired you originally for the Atala project. You were replacing Bruno. That's where we first put you.
Yeah, that was it. It was just around the summit that we had in Miami. So I'd come out and met the team and just get a feel of the company. And yeah, at the time we did kind of a soft launch for Atala at the time. It was being positioned as more kind of a Hyperledger competitor. But I think Bruno had actually the vision already at that time, which was really, Bitcoin's there for value. We need to do something for data and managing data. And so he did. I don't know if it was him or Carlos had coined the term to do for money or to do for, what was it? To do for data what Bitcoin does for money.
Right.
So that was kind of the tagline they had at the conference. Yeah, so really that was my entry into IOHK. And then, what are the first things that we did actually was then just a competitor analysis, just to look at, where we were at that point in time versus Hyperledger Quorum and, so, some of the other permission chains that were out there. And I think at the time, we then felt, just to catch up and then differentiate beyond then, it would take us quite a lot of time and a lot of
Right.
effort. And actually, if the Cardano nodes were actually also going to work in a permissioned mode, so we were probably better off waiting for that tech to kind of be ready and then building our permissioned offering around tech that was coming out of Cardano that we could reuse. So then we started to look at, actually, if we're looking at solving the data problem, how do we go about doing that? And that's when we started kind of looking at, where's the identity market today, and looking at, some of the problems that that you have with, at that point in time, I guess federated identity is what most people know. So log in with Google, log in with Facebook, or with Apple. But we saw the consequences of that with Cambridge Analytica and so on, where you entrust your data and all these digital interactions you have with a third party, and they can abuse that, and you don't even know that that's happening behind the scenes. And then we started looking at, okay, what's happening in the industry, and there was definitely traction happening within the W3C about this concept of self-sovereign identity, and that's when I started to kind of immerse myself in that and really understood it and figured out, actually, this is the direction that we should be going in, because it leverages kind of the properties of the blockchain to provide basically a more secure, more customer-centric form of identity with privacy built in by design, and beyond identity, it can also give it's a robust framework for how people can actually manage their data as well. So it was kind of continuing this vision that Bruno and Carlos and others had, and kind of bringing it into a new paradigm that was more future-proof, more standardized. And we looked at it and we thought, okay, maybe should we just start, because there was Hyperledger Indie at the time, and they were already experimenting with some of these concepts, and we looked at it, initially we thought, should we just contribute to that and build on top of it? And we didn't think that they were architected well enough to kind of scale, because our premise was like any piece of data, any IoT device should be able to have an identity, and we should be able to deal with kind of billions of things. And that's when we started to consider kind of building our own protocol. And at that time, actually, Microsoft came up with a white paper around Sidetree. So they were also thinking about similar things, and they beat us to it. But they thought about it just from the DID perspective, not really considering verifiable credentials as part of that. So what we did was really take that as a starting point, because it had many of the elements we needed. We added verifiable credentials to that protocol, so you could have DIDs and then be able to kind of issue claims about those DIDs. And we actually then worked on several versions of that protocol. So first was a layer 2, and the latest one is actually quite tightly coupled with Cardano, because what we saw with the Microsoft protocol was that you run into issues around data availability, because some of your data is stored either in IPFS or in another permission blockchain, and if that's not available, then you can't really do much with it. So there were late publish attacks and various things. So we were able to kind of actually, Zico did a phenomenal job around the protocol design. So we're able to kind of eliminate all those kind of attack vectors and have something that could leverage Cardano's properties and the metadata field to do this. So we didn't need this other layer that the competitors had around this content addressable storage.
But also, so hang on. So one of the really cool things that this dialogue is showing is how product evolution happens. So when you entered Atala, it was a permission blockchain, kind of akin to a Fabric competitor. And the idea was, oh, okay, well, there's all this stuff going on in permission blockchain. Let's go do some stuff there and figure it out. Now, meanwhile, Duncan, because he's just such a brilliant architect,
Yeah.
he's a brilliant engineer, he was, oh yeah, permission blockchain is super easy. We'll just make it a flag. And you have a permission mode of Cardano and a permissionless mode of Cardano. And you're like, okay, if that's the case, maybe we shouldn't go full into that because you guys are doing that over there. But then, Hyperledger is thinking about identity. The whole industry is thinking about identity. All the people are working. And you say, hang on a second here, identity is the core of all of this. And we should probably do something there. And they said, well, they're doing it at the W3C. They have did Manu Sporny and Chris Allen. They've been working on it forever. Let's go do something there. And we say, initially, let's go borrow something. So we look at Hyperledger Indy, we borrow that and say, it's not quite fit for purpose. And then suddenly Microsoft has side trees and there's this Ion product they have. Oh, well, there's some good ideas there. But then because you guys had the blockchain experience and because you guys have been kind of playing around all these different ponds, you realized that there needed to be tighter coupling for data availability and verifiability. So you say, well, actually, let's go it alone, but let's do so with all the wisdom of the entire industry. Now, there's no way that anybody could have taken a step back and said, oh, yeah, this is exactly what we're going to do. It was more you had to go down this serpentine winding road to get to this end point. But now we actually have a beautiful product that can scale and service the needs of millions of people. And that's Prism. So let's talk about Prism. Let's talk about the actual commercial deployment of Prism, because that's just so damn exciting. A real blockchain-based product for real people, not thousands, but actually millions. How did we get there? What's happening next with that?
Yeah, so we actually in December last year, we had a major milestone at that point. So we were able to we had everything working end to end. So when people see Prism, they think of it just as kind of an app that you download from the App Store, but there's many services behind that to actually make it look that simple. So we had this infrastructure working end to end, plugging into the Cardano testnet. So that was kind of the major milestone. And what the team has been focusing on is now kind of all the non-functional stuff. So now let's do scalability testing and make sure that this thing really scales to handle millions of users. Let's do security testing and making sure we're going to do those audits and also look at privacy as well, and make sure that certain databases that we have and the architecture doesn't compromise the kind of key principles. So we've been, and also on the user experience side, so we've been making sure that we're optimizing this as much as possible to make it seamless. Not just the user side, but also the developer side. So we've been thinking about all these components we've built, and also thinking about, okay, how can third parties also start to leverage the Prism platform? And so we've created this SDK in Kotlin that we'll be releasing soon, and would love to get a lot of feedback on this. But really, people are going to be able to develop using whatever language that they want, and they don't need to really know about the underlying platform. They can use JavaScript, they can use Kotlin, they can use Scala, and we've got different components using elements of this. So we've got a browser wallet that's very Scala dependent. We've got the mobile apps. We've got the management console, which is browser based as well. So we're basically dog fooding internally just to showcase that actually you can use this SDK and you can build this great experience. So the next step really is we've actually got a stable release of it. And we're playing around with that internally. So our professional service team is playing around with this, and some of the initial clients that we'll be announcing soon. Very soon, yeah. And so they're basically testing it out to make sure that we can meet all these requirements that the clients have, and looking for any bespoke features that we'll need to support for specific clients. The other thing is we've got some system integration partners that we want to work with initially that they've got their own clients and their own user base, and they're looking for an identity platform. So we'll work with them so that they can go and serve their customer base. But we want to do this kind of in a structured way. So we've been released it internally, releasing this to a small group of system integrators that can give us this feedback. Would love to do something like the Plutus Pioneer program for Prism. So work with maybe our education team to talk about how to build applications. We've actually got a tutorial already around this, but to allow people to figure out how to build on top of Prism, and then do hackathons so people can easily create their own services on top. We've had so much interest from people that want to build on top of Prism. So what we're thinking about as well is how can we make this as seamless as possible, so that this infrastructure is hosted in the cloud, so that people can spin up an instance easily and not have to worry about how do they run all these components, but just focus on building their solution on top of Prism. So that's what the team is focused on, and over the course of this year, we'll basically be rolling this out progressively.
Okay, so you're with the CEO of the company, Prism Pioneers. When should we do it? July, August. When does the Plutus Pioneers program come down? I know it's 10 weeks, but I can't remember where it ends.
So they've still got I think another month or so to go. So I'd love that we can do this in the July timeframe.
Okay.
July-August timeframe. So I hope. To be honest, we've got the documentation there. So we just need to work with our education team to make some nice courses. So that's going to take a couple months to make it a little bit more digestible and have maybe a few case studies that people going through the program can go through. And then, why not then sign up as many people around the world. The other thing that we want to explore as well is if we can work a little bit like how Google and Microsoft kind of get startups to work with their technology. So we can maybe work with some VC companies where they work with some startups and say, we'll give you access to Prism and give you, all these tools, and go and build wonderful solutions on top. And, we'll give you kind of hosting credits or whatever it is, so that they don't need to worry about that they can just worry about building their specific solution.
Yeah. So all right, fuck it. September 1st, we're doing Prism Pioneers. There we go.
Let's do
it. We're going to figure it out. Taking a step back, identity is, I would argue, as or more important than the money component. So we started in the cryptocurrency space with Bitcoin. So everybody got very token and money focused, but identity and blockchain is also an insanely important part, because you have to know who people are to do business with people. You have to know who's credible, who's not credible. Is someone qualified to do this? Someone legally allowed to do this? And in traditional legacy systems, we have KYC, we have AML, we have credit scores, we have reputation, we have this notion of counterparty. If your counterparty is a business versus an individual, and how to treat those counterparties based upon their identity. And this is lacking right now in the cryptocurrency space. And what we've been trying with the Prism program has been a first principles approach, a reinvention of this concept, and saying, instead of having it controlled by a top-down curation, one actor, and Bob gets to decide who's who, it's bottom up. But the problem when you do anything bottom up is all the old stuff, all the old protocols, they don't map one-to-one. Certain problems become exacerbated, like, for example, revocation. What do you do when you lose an identity or identity is compromised? When you have Bob, you go to Bob and be like, Bob, I lost my credential. Oh, okay, here's another card. Thank you. But when there's no Bob anymore, that's an issue. And then you also have this issue of privacy and what level of privacy, and also portability. How do you move these credentials from one system to another system? Because it's clear there's not going to be one system to control them all. So in many ways, this was one of our most complex products, which is why we felt so comfortable with you doing that product. But in the other way, this is a necessary product for us to actually pursue the mission of the company. When we say we're going after economic identity, we want people to actually have one marketplace. We want everybody to have equal access. And it's not good enough just to give them a token or a phone or something to connect. If they're actually going to participate in global commerce, they have to have an identity that is as recognized in America as it is in Zambia, as it is in China, as it is in Germany. So it's a great unifier in a certain respect. So let's go to the next thing. So there's Prism, but recently you've become the chief product officer of Input Output. So what the hell is a chief product officer? What do you do?
Yeah, so do less things well, which is what I'm trying to focus on at the moment. But I think at the core, it's just to go back and understand who are we solving this for, right? So for me, I guess coming from Africa, I mean, Cardano addresses many stakeholders, but the one I'm most passionate about is the subsistence farmer, mainly because if you look at the unbanked segment, the majority of people that are unbanked are subsistence farmers, and they're doing that because that's how they're basically able to take care of themselves. And what I'm passionate about is how can our technology really help this stakeholder who might not be literate, who might have poor access to connectivity or little or no electricity. So how can this technology help this person so that they can help their kids and their family, make sure that they're educated, and actually just bottom up help uplift the community. I think in many ways my life demonstrates what happens when you can invest in education and invest in a person, and really shouldn't take a whole community to kind of get just one person educated. We should find a way to kind of make it a lot easier. And what I'd like is really to give the subsistence farmer really the tools so that they can find economic freedom, so they can access loans, so that they can get inputs for their farms. That in many of these areas there's droughts, and global warming is impacting them. So can they get insurance at a cost-effective level that protects them from that as well? Can they access actually marketplaces where they can maybe even sell the goods even before they've planted them, and with forward contracts and so on? So what I would like us to do is really kind of fixate, understand really deeply the problem that subsistence farmers face, look at the current solutions in the market, and look at how Cardano can solve those in a way that's kind of 10 times better than what they currently have. And I think we have all the ingredients. So typically in the Cardano community, we're talking about eras of, Gauguin, Voltaire, Basho. These are kind of the Lego bricks that are providing really the enabling infrastructure. So with Plutus coming now, we can create decentralized versions of many businesses that exist in the local market, but enable kind of democratized access to them. So you can create new lending businesses, new insurance businesses that these people are able to access. Right now they can get lending, but from a loan shark at with a crazy interest rate that they can't really pay back. And can we create more fair systems? Right now I think drought insurance, very few people are able to access that. I mean, even if you look at kind of Ethiopia in terms of the loans people are able to access in the market there, only I think it was like about 5 or 6% were able to kind of get the capital. So what happens when you kind of open that up and you create a platform that kind of de-risks this, so that institutional money can come in and we can help the whole nation. And I think one of the interesting things that a lot of people forget, they typically think, oh, unbanked is charity and so on, but it's not really charity. I mean, if you look at kiva.org, the repayment rates for the unbanked are just as high, if not better, than the bank segment. So there's a real business opportunity.
I'm getting paid. I give tons of Kiva loans, and I actually get paid, almost all of them pay back.
Yeah, and if we can provide really the infrastructure that de-risks this, so that institutional players feel confident enough that the frameworks are in place for their money to come in, and they can collect a return, and we can work together with governments and other oversight committees around how that money is managed and how it flows. But I think that's what we need to kind of do, and make sure that our technology roadmap is incrementally delivering towards that vision. So for me as CPO, that's what I want to deliver, is really our core vision and mandate as a company, but make sure that, as we kind of build out these eras, we don't forget about our key stakeholder, that we can make sure this technology is really applicable for them. But of course, there are other stakeholders as well, and make sure that we address their needs as well. But the key thing is, if we make it work for this unbanked user who's illiterate, who's in a place where there's poor connectivity, then our technology can scale and really work everywhere. And I think that's our premise, and that's also part of the reason we're starting in Africa.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful competitive advantage, because if you can get it to work at that level and at that scale, it's probably going to be the most resilient and cheapest option for the developed world. And so it's like designing something to work in space. It's such a harsh environment. It's probably pretty easy to work anywhere else. So it's nice to have that. But one of the things people don't understand is Africa is not a monolith, as you're aware. It's many, many different cultures and many, many different countries. And there's a world of difference from Chad to Zambia to South Africa and so forth. So each and every one of these markets has very different dynamics. I had to learn this the hard way just doing business in Ethiopia. It was one of those markets, like, we're a very old country. We've been around since Christianity was born, and since before. We do things our way, and you guys just have to accept that. We said, okay. So it took a few years. We took a more relaxed pace, but we got it done. So let's talk about 2022. And when we look at aligning the product portfolio, what type of experiments would you like to see across all of Africa? And what particular different zones do you think we could do some cool and interesting, some fascinating things in?
Yeah, so the next kind of Lego brick, we've got Prism, so that's the basic identity framework. And I think where we want to get to is kind of initially giving the subsistence farmer access to these loans that are competitive, equitable, and so on. I think the missing bit in between is actually creating this framework or this platform where they can kind of de-risk this for the institutional players. And what does that mean? It's really about looking at how we can do credit ratings and enable that. And so there's really two ideas that we want to explore. One of them is, there's a lot of telecom operators that are interested in working with us, and they're sitting on a host of data. And one of the things that we can do is look at AI-based credit scoring. So when someone has a prepaid account, how frequently they top up, and how much, and so on, can tell you a little bit about how liquid they are, and that might be already a good basis to form a credit score that we can use as a base. The other approach, which is actually my preferred approach, is Prism is quite an open data sharing platform. So what we're doing really is enabling governments to be able to issue a digital identity for financial access. And what we're doing is, once the government is able to issue this ID, Prism is open in that it allows other ecosystem players to connect to that same installation and say something more about that identity. So right now what you have are lots of siloed micro lending institutions, community banks, cooperatives that are lending things. Most of them are just writing it in a logbook or in databases that are kind of ring fenced. So just creating a more open platform that allows basically all these existing players to plug in and be able to provide basically this financial history as well. So the lady who's been going to the local cooperative and got her farming inputs and maybe even sold back, suddenly that data exists somewhere. And she might have been a great farmer for 10 years, but there's no record of that. But now we're actually providing a way where the cooperative can write this, and she can now have this information and be able to present that to her bank, and we can expand that out. And actually, if we do a good enough job, it actually helps the small micro lender as well, because now they know how risky an individual is, and maybe they might lower their rates. Actually, we're not even the first to think of this. Kiva is starting to explore this idea in Sierra Leone. So they're as part of the Kiva protocol. They started working with the government there to see if this is a model that will that can work in that particular market. And one of the key things that we need to address as well is coming back to the unbanked farmer is, a lot of them don't have the smartphone, they don't have data, they don't have electricity. So our current solution is smartphone based. So, how do we kind of democratize our technology further so that, people can maybe interface with our systems using their biometrics. So as we work together with governments and we onboard users, the government can be a trusted party to capture that, or NGOs can be a trusted party to capture that. And then what happens is within the system, we can have Prism work in a mode where you have initially a data custodian, so a trusted party who hosts the data on behalf of the user. And then the user actually just needs to go to points of interaction. So they can go to their local shopkeeper who probably has internet access, the local bank and the micro lender who've got some infrastructure around them. They authenticate themselves using biometrics, and then this credit history is basically pulled from the secure personal data vault that's hosted by this data custodian. And then at that point, the bank can leverage that data and make a decision on whether or not they can lend to this individual. And if they do, then all the repayment history goes back into this platform again. So over time, you build a richer credit history. So this is a model we would like to explore. Of course, it requires government engagement. It requires buy-in from the micro-lending institutions. But I think it's there because we're helping de-risk their businesses. We're also enabling kind of additional capital to come into the market. So there's definitely a case to be made for that model.
Yeah, so I talked to John O'Connor specifically about this, and after we were discussing closing a certain deal, and I said, hey, next year I'm probably going to spend $10 to $15 million just in Africa, and those are going to be running experiments, seeding businesses, building relationships, opening new marketplaces. And we have a lot of great partners like iSatis and others. I think they have access to more than 25 countries. And you're absolutely right. Identity is the base layer in this respect. But once you have it, history. And what I see is this amazing the end is the beginning and the beginning is the end in your life, where when you were getting your master's, you were archiving African artifacts to make sure you didn't lose history. And now you're archiving people so that their history is not lost, so that it can actually be used in commerce. And that's a really cool concept. And what's really nice about all this is that these are platforms. Prism is a platform. Cardano is a platform. So it's not so much about what we build. We're building toolboxes and capabilities. It's more, well, once we train people, those people can build on top of these things. And then suddenly you have all these bottom-up applications that crop up. And there's tons of opportunities that these bottom-up applications produce. So I think you call that, when we were discussing this, the pull model instead of the push model.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've been doing, which is, working with governments and then trying to get a government level program to ensure everyone has an ID. The other approach we can do is, also to find engaging use cases that people are asking for today. The story I always tell is, like, if you go to Zambia, you'll find a shack and it's got a satellite dish, and they've got to watch that Chelsea game, and people make sure that they've got money for good content. So I think that's one thing. So if we can find those type of use cases where there's natural demand for services, and we can embed our technology in them, this will just drive demand, and this way maybe we can sign up a lot more users and even capture the country much quicker. There's also lots of telecom operators. People are most of them, even here in South Africa, you're paying double the price you'd normally pay in Europe, and people earn far less here, but still people have 2 or 3 phones with them, and they're constantly switching between mobile operators to try and get the best deal. So if we can democratize access to connectivity as well and leverage our technology in that space as well, I think that will really help us with this pool model and get really broad-based adoption, wrap content around that, and enable seamless access using our identity product to that connectivity, to this content. And then the umbrella with that is all the government initiatives, right? So, and all this data actually can then live back with the user, so they have an even richer history about themselves, and that can even build better and more accurate credit scores that are private by design, or they have privacy built in by design. So the user is always in control of their data. So it's a much better paradigm. They choose how they share this data with other parties. They have controls in there where they can revoke access to that data as well.
It's pretty cool. Okay, so somewhere along the way, I think you picked up a few kids. How many children do you have?
Oh, I've got one son. I'd love a few more, but I don't know if I'm going to find the time in the next year or so.
How old is your son?
He's 3.
Okay, so if you look to the future, let's say when your son turns 20, what type of Africa, what type of world would you like him to be in?
Well, I'm hoping at that point China's kind of the new Africa, and it's it's a very young. We've got very young population here, and I think many of the things that we're working on are kind of the foundational rails. There's the big Industry 4.0 initiatives across many countries, which is about kind of providing these rails that will kick off the next kind of industrial revolution. And I really hope that the things that we're working on provide the foundation and really create opportunity, bring in capital so people can innovate, build new businesses, and people don't need to look at the Silicon Valley or China for innovation. That it's homebred here in Africa, and people have access to the capital they really need. Everyone I talk to has many ideas. They just lack a way of getting capital. So I'm hoping that we can do this. And I guess my son lives in this world where, there's endless opportunities, and, he can really have the choice I'm starting to have now in my life, but from an early age. And I think having that platform to build from, will only elevate Africa, beyond China and beyond the US.
There you have it, folks. Started in Zambia, in a humble little town, ant hives that go up 6 meters. And then you went to a school where you had to ward off the lions, check the lakes for snakes, and kind of like a monastery. And after the monastic days, you got a bit of freedom and went a bit wild in South Africa. Then had a chance to start traveling all around the world. How many countries have you been to? Have you lost count, or do you keep score?
Yeah, I think I was close to 50.
50 countries. And how many languages do you speak now?
Oh, it's way less. So German, English, French very badly, Lunda, Bemba, Nyanja, so 6.
6 languages.
Yeah.
And know the place for the first time. It's an absolute honor to have you here as our Chief Product Officer. And I'm so glad you took some time to share your story with the whole world and inspire people. You'll probably be the busiest guy in the company, especially as we start building products. Because the problem with Cardano is it's the product that spawns 1,000 products. And each and every one of those needs a little bit of tender love and care to get to the next level. But I think the next wave of great entrepreneurs in our industry are definitely not going to come from America or Europe. I think they're definitely going to come from Africa. And my hope is that they build on Cardano as opposed to other platforms, because we built it for them. And it's going to be fun to see that happen. So thank you so much for coming. This was great.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, what I'll say is I'm just fascinated with what I'm seeing on Catalyst, really kind of this bottom-up effort, and really the amazing ideas and how the communities, even with the little resources and the little incentives we have right now, coming up with these grand ideas. So I'm positive really for the future of Cardano, and we're looking to give you better tools. We're looking to give you better support. So you guys can build these things cheaper, better, faster on the best platform out there. So watch this space, and I'm always open. So please hit me up if you've got ideas, and of how we can improve Cardano better and markets we're not serving and so on.
How do people reach you if they're interested?
Well, I just started my Twitter account. I'm very private, actually, but I just started a Twitter account. So I'll let everyone see if they can find it.
Okay. All right. Until next time, everyone, have a wonderful day.